The day the humans arrived on the alien planet was a day none of the inhabitants would ever forget. The starship descended slowly, its sleek metallic surface gleaming under the light of the twin suns. The aliens, known as the Talor, gathered in their Grand Council Hall, eyes wide with curiosity and disbelief. The Talor had always believed themselves to be the most advanced species in the galaxy. Their technology was unmatched, and their civilization was old, wise, and peaceful. Yet, here they were, facing something they couldn't quite understand: the arrival of a human envoy. The humans were an oddity in the galaxy, a species that had only recently begun to reach beyond their own planet. The Talor had been watching Earth for decades, studying the strange creatures who seemed to care little for galactic affairs. The humans were primitive in their ways, often clashing with each other over territory and resources. It was hard to believe that such a chaotic species could have anything of importance to offer. But now, as they stood on the threshold of the Grand Hall, the humans were about to reveal something that would shake the very foundation of what the Talor thought they knew. The human envoy, led by Ambassador Laura Evans, stepped onto the Talor planet's surface, her face calm and composed. Behind her, a small team of Earth's finest scientists and military officers followed, each carrying a strange object wrapped in cloth. The object, although small, seemed to pulse with an energy that was both foreign and familiar. The Talor watched intently, their advanced sensors scanning the human visitors, trying to determine what this object was. Ambassador Evans was a skilled negotiator, and she knew that the Talor would be skeptical of anything humanity presented. They viewed humans as little more than an upstart species, still struggling to make their mark on the galactic stage. But Evans had a secret, one that had been passed down through generations of humanity's greatest minds. She was about to show the Talor something they would never expect. With a wave of her hand, the cloth was removed, revealing the object beneath. It was a small weathered stone, roughly the size of a fist, covered in strange, intricate carvings. To the untrained eye, it might have appeared to be a simple artifact, perhaps a relic of some long-forgotten civilization. But the Talor were far from untrained. They immediately recognized the carvings on the stone as ancient symbols, not from Earth, but from the deepest corners of the galaxy. These were markings that had not been seen in millennia, and their meaning was lost to time. The Talor were confused. They had studied the universe for centuries, mapping the stars and documenting the rise and fall of civilizations. Yet this artifact was something they had never encountered before. They whispered among themselves, exchanging theories and trying to decipher the carvings. The ambassador remained silent, watching as the Talor attempted to make sense of what she had brought. Finally, the eldest of the Talor Council members, a being named Orin, stepped forward. His skin shimmered in the light, his multiple eyes narrowing as he focused on the stone. "Where did you find this?" he asked, his voice low and full of suspicion. Ambassador Evans met his gaze without flinching. "It was found on Earth," she replied, her tone steady. "But its true origins are not of this world. This stone, and the knowledge it holds, belongs to a time long before the rise of any known species, including yours." The Talor were silent, their eyes scanning the artifact as they tried to process the implications of her words. Orin's gaze flickered between the stone and the human ambassador. "What do you expect us to do with this?" he asked, his voice growing colder. "Why bring this here? What do you hope to gain from this?" Ambassador Evans stood tall, her face unreadable. "I am not here to make deals or bargains," she said. "I am here to share knowledge. This artifact has the potential to change everything you know about the galaxy. The legacy of its power could affect every species. It is a key to a history that has been buried for eons." The Talor leader studied her closely, trying to discern whether she was telling the truth or manipulating them. The idea that the humans had access to such a powerful and ancient relic was hard to believe. The Talor had never seen humans as a serious threat, let alone a species that possessed the knowledge of ancient powers. "I don't understand," Orin said slowly, his voice filled with doubt. "If this is truly an artifact of great power, why bring it to us? Why now?" Ambassador Evans stepped forward, the room growing silent as her next words lingered in the air. "Because the time has come for the truth to be revealed. What you think you know about the history of the galaxy is not the whole story. The powers that have shaped this universe are far older than you realize, and humanity, despite its youth and apparent weakness, holds the key to understanding it all." The settlers murmured amongst themselves, their eyes flicking between the humans and the stone. The idea that a young and primitive species like humans could hold such a key was incomprehensible to them. They had spent countless millennia studying the cosmos, and yet they had never encountered anything like this. How could this relic be so important? And why was it tied to Earth, a planet they had always considered insignificant? As the ambassador's words hung in the air, Oren's mind raced. He knew there was something more to this than met the eye. The markings on the stone were undeniably ancient, and the symbols seemed to resonate with something deep within him, something that triggered a sense of fear, a feeling he couldn't quite place. He had been alive for centuries, and he had never felt anything like this before. Without warning, a sudden tremor shook the ground beneath them. The lights flickered, and the temperature in the room dropped. Oren looked around in alarm, his multiple eyes scanning the room for signs of danger. The sailor had never experienced anything like this, and panic began to spread throughout the council. "What is happening?" Oren demanded. Ambassador Evans stepped back, her face pale. "It's begun," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The Guardians have awoken." The room went silent, and for the first time, the sailor saw true fear in the eyes of the humans. They didn't fully understand what had just been unleashed, but they knew that they had just set something in motion that could not be stopped. The sailor were no longer in control, and neither were the humans. Something much older, much more powerful, was now awake, and its power would change the galaxy. Four of the tremor subsided as quickly as it had started, but the tension in the room remained. The sailor leaders were still reeling from what they had just witnessed, the strange reaction to the stone that seemed to shake the very fabric of their environment. The air was thick with confusion and fear. They had been expecting diplomacy, perhaps some exchange of technology or knowledge. Instead, they were confronted with an ancient force, one that none of them had prepared for. Ambassador Evans, though pale, was steady. She had been trained for moments like this, moments where diplomacy wasn't enough, and the only option left was to face the truth head-on. She glanced at the sailor, who were still uncertain of what had just transpired. "What just happened?" Oren asked, his voice tight with suspicion. He was no longer the confident leader who had first greeted the humans. Now he was a beam on the edge of panic, trying to piece together the events that had just unfolded. "The Guardians," Ambassador Evans repeated, her voice a little firmer now. "They were bound long ago, in a time before either of our species existed. And now they are awake. You see, this relic is not just a key to our history. It's a trigger, a signal. It's calling something to the surface, something that has been buried for eons." The sailor stared at her, trying to comprehend. "You said, Part 2. Chak-Chi-Ki said." Ambassador Evans nodded slowly, her eyes scanning the faces of the sailor council. "Yes, Guardians," she said, her voice steady despite the tension. "Ancient beings who were once protectors of a power far greater than anything you or I can comprehend. Their task was to guard a force that could reshape the galaxy, a force so powerful that it was locked away in the depths of the universe. But the time has come, and that power is waking." The room fell silent. The sailor, who prided themselves on their advanced knowledge and technology, were now facing something they couldn't explain. Guardians, a power beyond their understanding. The idea seemed almost impossible to believe, yet the tremor and the strange energy they had all felt couldn't be ignored. Oren, the leader, stepped forward, his many eyes narrowing as he scrutinized the human ambassador. "Why bring this to us?" he demanded, his voice now edged with a mixture of anger and fear. You could have kept this to yourselves. If this force is as dangerous as you say, why awaken it? Why risk everything by showing us this stone? Ambassador Evans looked at him for a long moment, the weight of her next words heavy in the air. Because we can't control it. No one can. Not even the humans. But we need allies, and we need to prepare. What's coming is beyond anything any species has faced. We don't have the luxury of time to fight among ourselves. The Xalor were quiet, processing her words. It was clear that they were struggling to accept the reality that a human could know something they did not. The Xalor had studied the stars for millennia, observing countless civilizations rise and fall, yet they had never encountered anything like this. The stone, the tremor, the talk of ancient guardians, it was all too much to digest in one moment. Oren's thoughts raced. He had always considered humanity to be primitive, a species that was still struggling to establish itself in the vastness of the galaxy. Yet now, this human woman was telling him that they had knowledge of something far older, far more dangerous than anything the Xalor had encountered. The feeling of unease that had settled in the pit of his stomach grew stronger. What do you want us to do? Kale, the younger council member, spoke up, his voice shaking. He had never shown fear before, but now he couldn't hide the uncertainty in his tone. If these guardians are as powerful as you say, how can we help? How can we even stop them if they decide to turn on us? Ambassador Evans glanced at the Xalor council members, her expression somber. You may not be able to stop them, but you can help us prepare. Humanity has its own history with this power, our own legacy with the Guardians. We know their weaknesses, their patterns, but we can't do this alone. The room was silent again, as the Xalor exchanged looks with each other, uncertain whether to trust the human's words. The ambassador had a compelling presence, and her confidence was contagious. But even so, the notion that humanity, who had only recently taken their first steps beyond their own planet, could hold the key to stopping an ancient, galaxy-shaping force was hard to believe. We are not fools, Oren said finally, his voice low but firm. We understand the importance of your message, and we can see that you believe it. But trust must go both ways. We need more information. What exactly are these guardians, and why are they awakening now? Ambassador Evans let out a slow breath. The Guardians were once protectors of the source of all power in the galaxy, an energy that predates everything we know. It was sealed away by the oldest civilizations, including the ancestors of your people. They feared that the power could be abused, that whoever controlled it could reshape the universe in their image. And so they sealed it away and put the Guardians in place to protect it. But if they were locked away, why is it that the Guardians are awakening now? Kale pressed, unable to hide his fear. Evans' gaze hardened. Because the seal is weakening. The relic I showed you is part of the key that holds the seal in place. Its presence on this planet, on Earth, is what triggered their awakening. The Guardians are ancient, yes, but their purpose is clear. They are here to ensure that no one disturbs the power, that no one, human, Xalor, or any other species, has control over it. The council was silent for a long moment. The gravity of what the ambassador was saying was beginning to sink in. The Xalor had prided themselves on their ability to control everything, to be the most powerful race in the galaxy. Yet here they were, facing a threat that they could not even begin to understand. So, Oren began slowly, his voice quieter than before. You want us to stand with you against the Guardians, to protect something we don't fully understand. Yes, Evans said without hesitation. Because if we don't, the galaxy as we know it will change forever. We need your help to contain this power before it's too late. The Xalor exchanged uneasy glances. Oren, their leader, stepped back, his many eyes flicking between the stone and the ambassador. He could feel the weight of the decision pressing on him. This was not just about political power, it was about survival. But how could they trust the words of a human, a species they had never taken seriously? I don't know if we can trust you, Oren said, His voice strained. "But we don't have much of a choice, do we? The truth is, we are not prepared for something like this. If what you say is true, then we have no time to waste." Ambassador Evans gave a small nod. "Exactly. We don't have time for hesitation. The Guardians are awakening, and they will not wait for us to figure out our differences. We must act now." The room fell silent once more, and for the first time, the sailor realized the weight of the choice before them. This wasn't just a matter of diplomatic alliances or galactic power. It was a matter of survival. And whether they liked it or not, they had just been swept into a war that had started long before their time. The sailor leader finally spoke, his voice firm with resolve. "We will stand with you for now. But be warned, human. If we are to fight together, we expect the truth, all of it." Ambassador Evans nodded, her expression unwavering. "You'll get the truth, all of it. But only if we act quickly. There's no more time to waste." The decision was made. The sailor had agreed to stand with humanity, not out of trust, but out of necessity. The weight of their decision hung heavy in the air, knowing that the Guardians were not the only threat they would soon face. The galaxy was changing, and the old powers were stirring once more. And as the council hall doors closed behind them, the humans and the sailor knew one thing for sure: the fight for the galaxy had just begun. Ambassador Evans stood in the quiet room, the weight of the decision settling heavily on her shoulders. The sailor had agreed to join the fight, but there was no celebration, no sense of victory. Their agreement had been born of necessity, not trust, and that made it fragile. A fragile alliance could crumble at the first sign of danger, especially with so much at stake. She knew that. She had been in enough diplomatic negotiations to recognize when people were merely going along with something out of fear or circumstance. The council had dismissed her, leaving her alone with her thoughts. The ancient relic still rested in her hand, its dark surface gleaming softly under the light. It had felt like a simple stone when she first held it, but now it seemed heavier than anything she had ever carried. The power inside it, inside everything it represented, was so immense that it made her question if humanity, or any species, was truly prepared to face it. In her mind, she could hear the words the council had spoken. "We are not prepared for this." It was true. No one was. They had all underestimated the consequences of awakening the Guardians, and even now, with the sailor's agreement, she felt a gnawing sense of doubt. But there was no turning back. The Guardians were coming, and humanity was at the center of it all. Days passed quickly as the preparations for the coming conflict took shape. The alliance between humanity and the sailor remained fragile, but it was becoming more solid with each passing day. Ambassador Evans, now in close communication with sailor leaders, worked tirelessly to prepare for the worst. There was no way of knowing what the Guardians would do once they fully awoke, but there was no doubt in her mind that humanity would be the first target. The relic's presence on Earth had already set the wheels in motion. Meanwhile, back on Earth, the first signs of the Guardians' influence began to show. The reports were strange and unsettling. Animals, once docile, were acting erratically. Entire regions were experiencing bursts of strange, uncontrollable energy. Scientists were baffled, unable to explain the phenomena. But the more the incident spread, the clearer it became that something was wrong. Something was being awakened. Evans sat in a darkened room, reviewing the latest reports from Earth. Her mind raced as she absorbed the information. Every new incident, every new development, pointed toward one inevitable conclusion. The Guardians were beginning their work. They were preparing the galaxy for something, and she feared that humanity was at the center of their plans. She received a message then, blinking up on the screen. It was from Orin, the leader of the sailor. "We have a lead," the message began. The sailor archives contain ancient records. They speak of the Guardians and their purpose. "We found something. A fragment. It's a clue." Her heart skipped a beat. This was what she had been waiting for. The piece of information that could turn the tide. She tapped the screen, sending a quick acknowledgement back to Orin. "I'll be there in an hour," she replied. There was no time to waste. When she arrived at the Salar Council chamber, Orin was already waiting for her. His multiple eyes flicked toward her as she entered, his expression unreadable. "We've found something," Orin said again, his tone more serious now. "A fragment of the Guardians' history that speaks of their origins and their purpose." He gestured toward a holographic display at the center of the room. The projection showed a complex series of symbols and diagrams, too intricate to be easily understood by most. But Evans had seen this before. It was the language of the Guardians, or something very close to it. "What does it say?" Evans asked, her voice low with anticipation. Orin's eyes flicked over the symbols, his tone almost reverent. "It speaks of the Guardians' creators, an ancient race far older than any known civilization. The Guardians were not always protectors. They were once the enforcers of a galactic empire, a force of destruction and control. They were created to maintain order across the stars, to ensure that no civilization grew too powerful, too unruly. But somewhere along the way, they turned on their creators. They rebelled." Evans frowned. This was not what she had expected. She had thought the Guardians were a force for good, protectors of some ancient, sacred power. But this was something else. It was a glimpse into their true nature. Orin continued, his voice growing more intense. "The Guardians turned against their creators because they realized something. They realized that the power they were guarding, the power that lay within the stone, is not just a force of protection. It is a force of creation, of life itself. Whoever controls it, whoever can unlock it, could reshape the galaxy. And the Guardians, in their infinite wisdom, believed that no single species should have that power. Which is why they sealed it away," Evans said, piecing the information together. "To prevent any civilization from using that power for their own gain. But why awaken it now?" Orin's eyes darkened. "The seal is weakening. The Guardians were never meant to be eternal. Over time, their purpose changed. They became more than just enforcers. They became protectors of balance. But even they are not immune to the passage of time. The power they guard is calling out, awakening once more. And it is doing so because the galaxy is changing." Evans took a step back, absorbing the weight of the revelation. If the Guardians had rebelled against their creators, if they had turned on their own kind, then what would stop them from doing the same to humanity and Axelor? The Guardians would not hesitate to destroy anyone who posed a threat to the power they protected. "Is there any way to stop them?" Evans asked, her voice barely a whisper. Orin's silence spoke volumes. There was no easy answer. "They are ancient, and their knowledge of the power they guard is beyond anything we can understand," he finally said. "But there may be a way to control them, to make them listen." Evans looked at him sharply. "How?" "We have to find the other relics," Orin said, his voice low. "The Guardians are bound to the relics. They are the key. If we can collect them all, if we can use their power, we may have a chance to control the Guardians. But we must act quickly. The longer we wait, the stronger they will become." Ambassador Evans nodded slowly, her mind racing. This was the break they had been waiting for, the one piece of hope in an otherwise hopeless situation. If they could find the other relics, they could control the Guardians. And with that control, they could stop the galaxy from descending into chaos. But the path ahead was dangerous, and the stakes had never been higher. The countdown had begun. The tension in the room was palpable as Evans stood in front of the council, her mind spinning with the new information. The discovery of the other relics had given her a shred of hope, but the weight of what it meant, of what they would have to do to find them, felt like a burden she could barely carry. The Guardians were not just another threat to face. They were the ultimate force, an ancient and seemingly unstoppable power. And if the Guardians were anything like their creators, they wouldn't hesitate to wipe out anything in their path. "Time is running out," Orin's voice echoed through the chamber, snapping Evans back to reality. We must find the other relics before the Guardians can use them. If they unlock their full power, we will be powerless to stop them." The room went silent, the weight of Oren's words sinking in. The Guardians' power wasn't just about defense or protection. It was about domination, control. Whoever had mastered the relics would be able to rewrite the entire galaxy. And Evans couldn't help but wonder if the Guardians had ever truly intended to protect anything at all. She cleared her throat, pushing the troubling thoughts aside. "Where do we start?" she asked, focusing on the immediate task ahead. The answer was simple, but the process was anything but. They needed to find the relics, and that meant traveling to the farthest corners of the galaxy, into territories controlled by enemies they didn't fully understand. Every step was fraught with danger, but there was no choice. Oren gave her a cold look. "We start with the first relic's location. The coordinates we received are not exact, but they point to an ancient ruin on the outskirts of the Xalar homeworld. The first relic may have been there for millennia, but even if we find it, the Guardians are bound to have set up defenses. It won't be easy." "Then we take the Xalar forces with us," Evans said without hesitation. The Xalar were a fierce and capable species, and their warriors could provide the muscle needed to fight whatever threats lay ahead. But she also knew that the Xalar's loyalty could not be taken for granted. After all, the Guardians were as much a threat to them as they were to humanity. Oren's face darkened. "We can't risk mobilizing too many. The Xalar are already in a delicate position. Any large military force could attract attention, and we don't want the Guardians to know we're coming." "So we go in with a small team," Evans suggested. "Quietly, quickly, and efficiently." A few murmurs of agreement passed through the room, and Oren nodded slowly. "Agreed. A small team it is. But we must be prepared for anything. The Guardians have been waiting for this moment for eons. They won't let us take the relics without a fight." The council was silent again, the gravity of their mission settling over them all. Finding the first relic was just the beginning. The journey would take them to places no one had dared to go in millennia, and each step would bring them closer to the awakening of an ancient, godlike power that could destroy everything they held dear. As the planning continued, Evans couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Something far beyond the Guardians' power, something hidden in the shadows of history, was watching. The relics were important, yes, but the Guardians themselves, ancient beings created to enforce balance across the galaxy, were something else entirely. She couldn't help but feel like they were being led into a trap. The Xalar had already begun mobilizing forces to accompany the mission, but Evans knew that the success of the operation hinged on more than just their military prowess. The relics had a purpose, perhaps a purpose even the Guardians didn't fully understand. Whoever held them would be able to harness their power, and that power might be their only hope against the Guardians. But even with all the preparations in place, Evans couldn't shake her doubts. What if the Guardians had anticipated their every move? What if their trap had already been set? The day of departure came quickly. The small team of humans and Xalar prepared to leave the safety of the council chamber and embark on the mission that would change the course of the galaxy. Evans stood at the edge of the spaceport, watching as the ships ready for takeoff. Each ship was a masterpiece of engineering, designed for speed and stealth. There was no room for error. They had one shot to find the first relic before the Guardians or anyone else could stop them. Her heart beat faster as the final preparations were made. She glanced over at the Xalar warriors assigned to the mission. They were silent, stoic, their alien features betraying no sign of emotion. She had seen their kind in action before. They were skilled, relentless. But she also knew that the Xalar had a deep mistrust of humanity. If anything went wrong, they might turn on her. She couldn't afford to let that happen. Evans stepped up to the ramp of the ship, her eyes scanning the horizon. The mission had to succeed. For Earth, for the galaxy. The relics had to be found, or the Guardians would rise again, unstoppable. With a final deep breath, she boarded the ship, signaling the others to follow. The engines roared to life as the ship ascended into the sky. the stars stretching out before them like an endless sea. As the ship hurtled toward its destination, Evans looked out the window at the distant stars, wondering what awaited them. She could feel the weight of history pressing down on her, knowing that humanity was about to face a challenge unlike anything it had ever encountered. But deep down, there was something else, a sense of purpose, a sense that this was their moment. The moment when humanity would rise and take its place among the stars, not as mere survivors, but as masters of their own fate. Whatever lay ahead, she was ready. And she knew the Guardians would learn the hard way. Humanity was not to be underestimated. The journey to the Salar homeworld was long and grueling, the ship cutting through the cold, empty vastness of space. Evans could feel the tension building in the air. The team had been briefed and prepared, but there was always that lingering uncertainty that came with facing an enemy like the Guardians. This was unlike anything they had encountered before. It wasn't just about defeating a foe in battle. It was about finding something that had been lost for millennia, something that held the key to either saving the galaxy or destroying it. As the ship neared its destination, Evans couldn't help but glance around at her team. The Salar warriors were quiet, their eyes sharp and focused, their weapons holstered but ready. They had fought in countless wars. But this was different. They knew, just like she did, that the stakes were higher than anything they had ever faced before. How much longer? One of the Salar warriors asked, his voice deep and gravelly. Evans checked the console in front of her. We're approaching the atmosphere. Less than an hour. The warrior nodded but said nothing else. The rest of the team was silent too. Every person on board had their own reasons for being here, but none of them were under any illusions about the danger they were facing. The relics were a mystery, and if they fell into the wrong hands, or worse, were used by the Guardians, they could end all life as they knew it. The ship descended toward the surface of the Salar homeworld, and Evans felt a strange sensation as they crossed into the planet's atmosphere. It was as if something unseen was watching them, waiting for them to land. The air grew thicker, and the temperature dropped as the ship made its descent. The landscape outside the ship was unlike anything Evans had seen before. Towering mountains stretched up into the clouds, their jagged peaks piercing the sky. Vast forests covered much of the land, and rivers wound their way through the valleys. But there was something off about it all. A deep, quiet stillness. It was almost as if the land itself was holding its breath. The ship touched down with a soft thud, and Evans stood, her mind racing with what lay ahead. She motioned for her team to follow her as they filed out of the ship and onto the rocky ground of the Salar homeworld. The wind whipped around them, carrying with it the scent of pine and earth, but there was no time to enjoy the strange beauty of the planet. They had a mission to complete. Stay close, Evans instructed as she led the group forward, her eyes scanning the surroundings for any signs of danger. The Salar warriors flanked her, their sharp eyes trained on the environment, their senses alert. They had no idea what they were about to face, but they would be ready. They trekked through the forest, making their way toward the ruins of an ancient city that had been abandoned for centuries. The relic they sought was believed to be hidden there, somewhere deep within the crumbling stone structures. As they approached the city, the feeling of unease only grew stronger. The air was thick with tension, and the ancient buildings seemed to watch them as they entered. The stone walls were covered in strange symbols, some of which Evans recognized as part of the long-forgotten language of the Guardians. This place had once been alive with activity, an ancient civilization that had vanished without a trace. But it wasn't the ruins that made Evans feel uneasy. It was the feeling that they weren't alone. Something in the air, something in the shadows, whispered of dangers far beyond their comprehension. She couldn't shake the feeling that the Guardians were closer than they had ever been before. "Do you feel that?" one of the Salar warriors asked, his voice low and tense. Evans nodded. "I do." They moved silently through the ruins, each step taking them deeper into the heart of the ancient city. The further they went, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. The walls seemed to close in on them, and the shadows lengthened unnaturally. It was as if the city itself was alive, watching them, waiting for something. Finally, they reached the heart of the city, where a massive structure stood, its tall spires stretching toward the sky. The building was unlike anything Evans had seen before. The architecture was otherworldly, a blend of smooth, flowing lines and sharp, jagged angles. It was clear that this place had been built by beings far beyond their time. But what had happened to them? Why had they disappeared? "It's here," Evans said, her voice barely a whisper. The relic they sought was inside. She was certain of it. She motioned for the team to proceed with caution. As they moved inside the structure, the atmosphere grew even heavier, as if the very air was charged with ancient energy. The walls were lined with strange markings, glowing faintly in the dim light. The Xalar warriors moved cautiously, their weapons drawn, scanning every corner for danger. The relic was located deep within the heart of the building, inside a chamber that appeared to be untouched by time. The door to the chamber was locked, but Evans knew that the key to unlocking it lay within the strange symbols on the walls. The relic would only reveal itself to those who could decipher the language of the Guardians. "We need to solve this puzzle," Evans said, studying the markings on the door. "It's the only way inside." One of the Xalar warriors stepped forward, his eyes narrowing as he examined the symbols. "It's the language of the ancients," he muttered. "I know this." Evans stepped back, allowing the warrior to take the lead. The puzzle was intricate, a combination of symbols that had never been seen in thousands of years. But the warrior's knowledge of the ancient language gave him an edge. He traced his fingers over the symbols, his mind working quickly to unlock the mystery. After what felt like an eternity, the warrior finally stepped back. "Done," he said, his voice filled with awe. The door began to rumble and slowly opened, revealing the chamber inside. What lay within was beyond anything Evans could have imagined. The room was filled with a golden light, and in the center of the chamber stood a pedestal, upon which rested the relic. It was unlike anything Evans had ever seen, an object of such beauty and power that it seemed to radiate with energy. For a moment, the team stood in awe, the weight of their discovery sinking in. They had found it, the first relic. But as Evans stepped forward to claim it, she felt a chill run down her spine. The Guardians were near. They had to hurry. And as she reached for the relic, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of something far more dangerous than any of them had anticipated.